And
hello, everybody, and now I can see I'm live. I have to apologize for the bit delay, but this is like our first webinar, and as you can imagine, we still like making sure that everything works technically. So thanks for your patience, and I really welcome everybody. I heard like we're about like 60 participants already, and that's great. I'm on my side. We have like a different like room for the presenters. We also very anxious to start our first webinar today. And education for all learners, sustainable approaches for COVID-19 response in Jordan. GSZ and the project Promise, promoting quality of inclusive education, are doing this series, webinar series, together with our partners, the Ministry of Education and the Higher Council for the Rights of People with Disabilities. So I'm really glad also that I have my colleagues joining me today. Not only like they helped in preparing the webinar, but also they will today present. So like the aim of the webinar series, or when we started to have the idea with the webinar series, I mean, like some of you who are based in Jordan might remember that we had the launch of the 10 years inclusive education strategy in February this year. And when we as GSZ, together with our named partners, started to prepare the implementation after like what I thought was a really great event, COVID-19 hits us all. And we then, the Ministry of Education can tell even better, and also the Higher Council have been really involved in organizing to make sure children still can learn with the closure of the schools. But still also we saw immediately the challenges vulnerable children face, and also like especially children with disabilities, and how difficult it is to find measurement to reach them during this difficult time. So we immediately saw like it's the best time again to remind everybody and remember ourselves, and also to see what does it mean for the 10 years inclusive education strategy, and how we can really assure, even in these difficult times, to make sure everybody can learn. So this webinar series, on the one hand, is something we can do. I mean, a lot of organizations currently do webinars to make sure partners are still linked. I mean, like we have been facing, I mean, everybody of us was online, felt like 24/7 in the last weeks. So we thought it's a great idea, like to bring everybody together and again, remind each other on the 10-year strategy, but also like to see with different international experts to discuss certain topics which are relevant currently because schools are still closed, but which also have a relevance in the future. So that's the purpose of this webinar series. Altogether, we will have 6 webinars, and today we will start with the topic Learning Together with Inclusive Distance Programs. And before starting to introduce our colleagues today, please let me give you some of the webinar house rules and logistics, so to say. So the language of the webinar is, we will have the live captioning is taking place in English. I hope you see it like, it's usually on my side. It was like on the left side, you should see like the live capturing happening. We have a sign interpreter is present. You also should see Julia Zureikat. She's like making sure like that we have a sign interpretation. Thank you for that one, Julia. We have an Arabic translation provided via the YouTube live stream, and the link is shared in the chat section by David. So the presentations will be in English, but you will be able to listen to the Arabic translation via the YouTube live stream. The presentations today are only available in English, but we will, after the webinar, also share the Arabic translation with you. So if you have any questions or comments, please write it, use the chat for that one. We decided to have the audio and video function for participants switched off, but you can use the chat. And some of you I know also have placed questions before. Thank you for that one. We will also handle that one. And we will have always a dedicated session after the presentation where David and Serene will help me to sum up what has been posted by you. And we also have at the end a dedicated 30 minutes where we hope to start a further discussion, and especially looking on what has been said before, how we can implement, in today's case, inclusive learning, distance learning to Jordan. So the session is recorded so that we can make it available to all participants again, but also like for the ones who couldn't join. The recording will be uploaded on the different websites. We will also post you a link on that one. Both the Higher Council and the MOE will have it posted on the social media channels, and also like GIZ Promise Project will have it posted on the Facebook and YouTube. So, but we will send that one around too. So if you don't agree to the recordings, we kindly have to ask you to leave the webinar. But I hope everybody agrees to that one, so that we can also disseminate the knowledge later on. So as I mentioned before, the webinar, which just will start in a minute, is divided into two parts. So we have the first part, which is about 60 minutes. We will listen to the different presentation from international speakers and local experts. And then we have like a dedicated second part where really 30 minutes we want to open the floor for different discussion, clarify additional questions, or just like to see also the next step forwards. We dedicated this 2 slots because I know that a lot of people haven't maybe not the time for staying 1.5 hours. So we say like, if you don't have the time, just like stay the first 60 minutes. But of course, we welcome everybody to stay a bit longer and start the discussion. So I like to address a special welcome, not only everybody listening today to us, but also like especially for the colleagues who admitted to participate today. And this is like Dr. Alia Jaradat from the Ministry of Education, Head of Disability Department. We have Petrasch Hannahan joining us from the United States. He's one of the project director at the Brookings Institutes, and his colleague in Jordan from INJAZ, Ghaith al-Shokairi. And we have 2 colleagues from the Higher Council, and that is Radia Al-Haras and Alia Zureikat. And I will present them also a bit later. And I like to especially welcome also you, Dr. Sami Mahassis, that you were able to join, because he is the head of the Education Managing Directorate of the Ministry of Education. And thank you for joining us, and also give a welcoming address from the Ministry of Education. So the floor is yours, Dr. Sami.
Thank you. مساء الخير للجميع. بحب بداية أن أرحب فيكم في هذا المؤتمر الافتراضي الأول اللي يعقد بالتعاون ما بين وزارة التربية والتعليم والمجلس الأعلى لحقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة بالتنسيق مع الوكالة الألمانية للتعاون الدولي GIZ. حقيقة نأمل في هذا المؤتمر بالخروج بالعديد من التوصيات اللي تعود بالفائدة على هذه الفئة من الطلبة ذوي الإعاقة. جهود في فترة الجائحة في الشهور ال3 الماضية، وزارة التربية والتعليم حقيقة قامت بجهد مضاعف فيما يتعلق باستمرارية التعليم. ونحن في الوزارة إدارة التعليم أيضا عملنا مع المجلس الأعلى، وأنا بشكر حقيقة من خلال افتتاح هذا المؤتمر الافتراضي اللي هو المجلس الأعلى لحقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة على وضع ضوابط لتقييم طلبة من ذوي الإعاقة. وبتأمل إن شاء الله تعالى أن يكون بداية عملنا مع الأطراف ذات العلاقة بالعودة بالفائدة على الأطفال، وخاصة الأطفال ذوي الإعاقة. أوكي.
Yes, thanks a lot, Dr. Sami. Now, somebody has to help me. Is the translation in the chat of Dr. Sami's welcome, or will you do it? Serene, yes, I see you.
Yes.
Great.
Hello everyone. حاب أرحب بالجميع. دكتور سامي كلمته كانت هو حابب يرحب بكافة المشاركين. Yeah. So Dr. Sami is welcoming all the participants who's joining us today in the first webinar related to a series of 6 webinars that is aiming to discuss the sustainable approaches that's covered like the response to COVID-19. After welcoming everyone, Dr. Sami was like, he wanted to share that after conducting all these series of webinars, the recommendation, it will be taken into consideration by the Ministry of Education and will be considered in the next steps and the recovery phase that the Ministry of Education is planning to have. Also, like during the COVID-19, the Ministry of Education prepared an emergency plan to respond all learners to deliver quality educational services. And he's again welcoming everyone, and hopefully that everyone will benefit from this exchange and a different level, and that will be the start of a long cooperation jointly with the Higher Council and also like GIZ and other relevant partners and stakeholders. And that's it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Serene, for the translation, and thank you again, Dr. Sami, for the nice welcoming. I like to jump now to our first presenter, and do you know what? I just reminded myself that I didn't introduce me. You feel yourself always very known to yourself. Sorry for that one. So my name is Stefanie Petrasch, and I'm the head of the education for GIZ education portfolio in Jordan, and I'm also the project manager of the Promise project. So again, my welcome to everybody. And I like to start now to introduce our first presenter today, Dr. Alia Jaradat. Dr. Alia Jaradat, it's really nice to see you. We haven't seen for a while, so it's like great at least to meet like online. Thanks a lot for today joining. Dr. Alia obtained a PhD in psychology and education and psychological counseling, and holds a license from the Ministry of Health to work in the field of psychotherapy and psychological counseling. So if everything doesn't go smooth today, Dr. Alia, you can help me later with a counseling session. You work since 2000, which is like over 20 years now, for the Ministry of Education in several fields in special education. You have been different position. I don't name them all because the participants also get your biography. But I also want to say that you have been a member of the national team developing the 10 years strategy for inclusive education. You are the liaison officer to the organization working for inclusive education under the umbrella of the strategy. You are the decision maker of the higher committees overseeing the programs for students with disability and outstanding students. So it's really great to have you today in our webinar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to all my colleagues. I will talk briefly about the 10 years strategy of inclusive education. Okay, we work about this strategy with the High Counseling, with of the right of the disabilities persons. Okay, this strategy is depend on the stipulated in Article 18/H of the Law of the Right of Persons with Disabilities 20 of the year 2017. What is the inclusive education? Inclusion is a process of addressing and responding to the diversity of needs of all learners through increasing participation in learning cultures and communities, and reducing inclusion within the form education. It involves changes and modifications in content, approaches, structures, and strategies with a common vision which covers all children of appropriate age range and conviction that it is the responsibility of the state to educate all children. Legislative framework of the strategy. Jordan ratified the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities. It passed law number 20 for the year 2017, affirming the right to education of persons with disabilities. Towards the attainment of the goal number 4 of the SDGs 2015 to 2030 related to quality education. Overall objective of the strategy: increase the number of students with disabilities enrolled to mainstream schools by 10% of total number of school-aged students in the coming 10 years. Prevision of all requirements of inclusive education toward enabling them enjoy and attain education, access all programs and services offered at educational institutions, as well as receiving a quality education in an environment that accepts and accommodates differences and diversity and offers supporting educational environment to all students. Core components of the strategy included 9 components. The first one is policies and legislation. The second, awareness, media, and advocacy. The third one, identification, diagnosis, and evaluation. The fourth one is accessibility and responsible accommodation. The fifth is learning and teaching educational programs. The sixth one is human resources and capacity building. The seventh component talk about the preschool stage, nurses, and kindergartens. The eighth component about children who are not enrolled in mainstream school. The last one is about the research, scientific student, and excuse me, wait a minute. And database. We talk about a little bit about the component number 1, which take the policies and legislation. The legal basis for inclusive education founded on a number of legislations and laws that affirms the right of the persons with disabilities to quality and inclusive education based on equality and equal opportunity on an equal basis with their peers without disabilities. The second component, about the awareness, media, and advocacy. Awareness and media has an effective role in creating positive behavioral attitudes in the society for teachers, students, parents, and local community in order to facilitate the process for inclusive education and contribute to the acceptance of the students with disabilities, enhance their right to education, and work on changing methods and common but false stereotype values toward inclusive education. ما بترجم لك عادي. Thank you to all.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Alia.
You're welcome, Stephanie.
Yes.
And we will answer any questions about this strategy, okay?
Yeah. So we agreed like that maybe you can switch off your microphone, Dr. Alia.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's a bit of an echo. Thank you. We agreed that we will collect the questions. Please use the chat function, and Serena and David from our GSZ team will, after the next presentation, help us to casper the different comments we have got there. So thanks a lot, and I would like to hand over to our next speakers, which is Petrasch, Hannahan, and Ghaith Shokairi. Patrick is working for the Brookings Institution. You're a project director there. And Patrick, I know it's very early on your side. Thanks again for making that possible. Patrick helps to co-design and manage the Millings Learning Project. We will learn more about that one in a few minutes. You joined Brookings in July 2018, and you conducted research and analysis and writing in support of real-time scaling labs, action research approach. And prior to Brookings, you worked at Semonics International, where you designed and implementing large-scale USAID programs in Afghanistan, Iraq, Rwanda, Somalia, South Sudan, and Zimbabwe. And Patrick received an educational degree from Harvard University and a BA from the Miami University. Welcome, Patrick. Ghaith is a colleague in Jordan. Welcome you. You're working at the INJAZ Research Department, Development and Research Department, and you're one of the 2 researchers at the Real-Time Scaling Lab in Jordan, focusing on financial education programs. The major function of the Real-Time Scaling Lab is your main function is conducting desk and field research, analysis and documentations. And in addition, you're running other relevant projects at INJAZ, including documentation guidelines, and you're also responsible for monitoring and evaluation. And you also have a life before joining INJAZ. You also have worked for USAID projects, funded project, and you have several years of experience in media development in Jordan and in the MENA region. And you hold a degree from the Jordan University for Science and Technology. So welcome, both of you. I'm really keen. I mean, I got a bit of a preview of your presentation, but still it's always nice to listen it again. So the floor is all yours. And we are excited to listen now in the next 20 minutes to your presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie, and good afternoon to everyone in Jordan. I'm coming live from Washington, D.C., so it's very nice to be with you all. It's very early here, but this is the world we live in now, and so it's nice to see you all virtually. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to try doing that now so that I can go through my presentation. Is that working? Are you guys able to see my presentation?
I think not yet, Patrick. We saw, I think, your email program. I'm not too sure, but it wasn't your presentation. Maybe you try again.
How about now?
I don't see it. Maybe somebody can help from with the live meeting. We can see it. Ali, I'm not too sure if you can help us with that.
Maybe now, is that working?
I can see it on my
it is. Yeah.
So it's working now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Well, then I'll go ahead and begin. So as Stephanie said, my name is Patrick Hannahan. I'm a project director at the Brookings Institution based in Washington, D.C. I am fortunate to be able to travel to Jordan often in my job before coronavirus. So I miss coming to Amman, and I hope that everyone in Jordan is doing great. So we're going to talk today about our work on the Millions Learning Project, including principles of scaling, which we believe are important to apply when trying to expand the impact of inclusive education approaches so that all children have access to quality learning opportunities. So a little bit about Brookings. Brookings is a research and public policy think tank based in Washington, D.C. We've been around for about 100 years with the mission of conducting in-depth research that leads to new ideas for solving problems facing society at multiple levels. There are 16 research centers at Brookings, including the Center for Universal Education, or CUE, which is where I work. So today we are talking about scaling. If we pause the conversation and ask everyone on the call to provide their own definition, we might come up with something like this word cloud that you see on the screen. Scaling can be defined in a lot of different ways. Less important for us at CUE is deciding on one precise definition of scale, and more important is beginning with a definition of scale that is relevant to your initiative. Because how scaling is defined influences how policymakers develop strategies, how programs are designed, how donors allocate funding, and how researchers approach the problem. The definition of scale can and should shift depending on what you are trying to accomplish. At CUE, we think about scaling in terms of expanding impact that leads to improvements in people's lives. So not necessarily one specific approach or a fixed model, but more spreading the essential principles of effective teaching and learning practices. I'll now move to introduce the Millions Learning Project. The first phase of our work was from 2014 until 2016. During this time, we investigated the questions of where have we seen large-scale progress in education and how did this happen, to identify the key drivers that facilitated or impeded the scaling process. During phase one, we conducted desk research, compiled literature reviews, and analyzed 14 case studies around the world of education initiatives that had effectively scaled. This phase culminated with the Millions Learning Report, which was published in 2016 to share insights and recommendations with policymakers, practitioners, and funders on how to scale education initiative. This report is available on the Brookings website. Looking across the range of programs and policies studied during phase one, some common patterns and themes emerged. These are the 14 core ingredients that you can see on your screen. We believe these have enabled the scaling of quality learning across our case studies, and these are divided into 4 categories: design, delivery, finance, and the enabling environment. Brookings has launched real-time scaling labs in partnership with government and local institutions in 6 countries, including Jordan, to generate new evidence and provide practical recommendations around the process of scaling in education. This is essentially bringing research and practice more closely together. These labs are not physical spaces, but rather a process established by Brookings and local partners to learn from, support, and document efforts to scale education initiatives. So as you can see on the screen, we are learning about the scaling process and growing the global evidence base by regularly sharing findings with key stakeholders in actionable ways. We are directly supporting initiatives by providing a space for multiple stakeholders to engage in an adaptive learning process and developing tools and guidance to facilitate this process. And we are rigorously documenting the scaling process to better understand the enabling factors that support scaling, with a particular emphasis on investigating issues related to equity and inclusivity. Here is the initial cohort of our 6 scaling labs. These labs regularly engage with each other in person and virtually to exchange insights and lessons learned and work through common issues together. As you can see on the screen, we have labs in a number of different countries, and in a little bit, my colleague Ghaith will take us closer through the work of the lab in Jordan. This is the general lab cycle. There's of course much more happening at each of these stages, but overall the lab brings together approximately 20 to 30 key stakeholders in each country to develop a detailed scaling plan, reconvene periodically to reflect on progress, and use real-time data and information to guide adaptations. The coronavirus has underscored the importance of an adaptive learning approach that is flexible to changes in the environment. And each of our scaling lab countries is currently assessing the impact of the pandemic on their education systems and developing solutions to continue reaching students, especially in marginalized communities as schools are closed. So what have we been learning about scaling so far? I'm excited to share 3 scaling principles which we believe are important. Ghaith will shortly discuss each of these principles through the work in Jordan, but I will just introduce them at a high level now. So the first key principle is to fall in love with the problem. This phrase comes from Anne May Chang's book called Lean Impact, where she argues to make the biggest impact, fall in love with the problem and not the solution. To scale sustainably, it is important to focus on addressing an issue identified as a priority by local stakeholders, rather than implementing a predetermined solution. Falling in love with the problem requires understanding the root causes of the problem to solve and working with local stakeholders to address it in ways that make sense in a specific context. So in scaling, there can be a real temptation to lead with the solution or to come in with the program or the model that you believe is best suited to work in that country. But we think that there really should be deliberate analysis upfront of the problem to ensure that the solution you propose is indeed appropriate. The second key principle is to take a systems approach. And as you can see on your screen, this silly elephant cartoon is a simple but accurate illustration of a systems approach. And as you can see in the photo, different people within the system observe different parts of the elephant. So taking a systems approach requires involving a diverse group of stakeholders to bring in multiple perspectives, since one person can only see part of the system and may prioritize certain things over others. Not surprisingly, in order to sustainably scale, education decision makers need to analyze systems as a whole, as well as the interplay of relationships within them, rather than examining the individual components independently. Lastly, scaling is a cyclical process. Scaling rarely follows a linear path of research to planning to action. Instead, it is a cyclical process with challenges to overcome and opportunities to seize along the way. Going about scaling in an adaptive learning way requires experimentation, learning, and course corrections. Beyond proving the initial efficacy of a model as it continues to expand, decision makers should continue to engage in this adaptive, iterative learning process. And this is exactly what the real-time scaling labs set out to do. In our research, we found little opportunity among stakeholders to stop and reflect and adapt. Those working on scaling are often so focused on what's ahead that they have little opportunity to engage in a process like this, and we believe it's critical. So I will now hand it over to my colleague, Ghaith, to share some more information about our work in Jordan.
Thank you, Patrick. If you can keep just this slide as I am speaking. Yeah. So hello, everybody, and I thank you very much for this opportunity. As Patrick said, in Jordan, Brookings and INJAZ are partnered on the real-time scaling lab to support and learn from the process of scaling the financial education program, or as we call it, the AFP, which INJAZ runs since 2015. The goal of the scaling lab is to mainstream the financial education program throughout all secondary schools in Jordan in collaboration with the Ministry of Education and with the support and coordination as well with the Central Bank of Jordan. The CUE and INJAZ co-lead overall lab activities, and 3 roles are particularly important. The first one is the real-time scaling lab manager, who is the high-level education leader who guides in-person and virtual lab meetings, supports the development of implementation of scaling plans between lab meetings, and builds important relationships with and among all lab members, including the organizations they represent. The second of all is the lab researchers, myself and my colleague Farah Abu Saif, who documents the scaling lab journey, including in-person lab meetings, interviews, and related meetings, and gathers data on key scaling drivers to assess their impact on the scaling process. And this includes both desk and field research activities. These two individuals, myself and Farah, serve as the day-to-day eyes and ears on the ground. And thirdly, the scaling lab members who are the core of this effort. In Jordan, there are approximately 20 lab members representing a variety of perspectives and sectors. This group includes high-level officials from the government as well as private sector leaders and civil society representatives. The lab meets in person as one large group approximately quarterly to investigate key questions about the scaling process and conduct related research. Since the first convening last year, the lab members, along with the research team, worked on identifying 5 focus areas based on the lessons learned from the past 5 years and the extensive desk and field research carried out through the last 12 months. These focus areas are the teaching and learning processes, the teacher training, qualitative and quantitative data, partnerships and outreach, and finally expansion of FEP to early grades from grade 1 to grade 6. Some of the main activities of the lab, which by nature evolves around one or more of these 5 focus areas, we are currently engaged in are the FEP digitization. I will come to that in a minute. The direct training of teachers and the teacher support hubs, which I will tell you more about in a minute. Referring back to the 3 key scaling principles Patrick introduced a few minutes ago, I will now provide an example of how the Jordan Real-Time Scaling Lab is embracing each of these principles. But I will start with the second principle, which is take a systems approach. As we all know, the financial inclusion has become a priority for policymakers, regulators, and development agencies. Worldwide, many countries have made commitments to financial inclusion. More than 30 countries have launched their national strategies in 2015, and this includes Jordan under the umbrella of the Central Bank of Jordan. Why the financial inclusion is important? Because it is directly linked to the country's economic and social development, and it is critical for employment creation, raising incomes, and reducing poverty. Needless to say, the Middle East countries have the highest unemployment rates globally and are in need of developing and implementing serious plans to enhance the status of the financial inclusion among their citizens. Hence, the Central Bank of Jordan launched its outline for the National Strategy for Financial Inclusion in 2018, covering 5 main themes, and under the 5th one, falls INJAZ's efforts in scaling and mainstreaming the financial education, which is the deployment of financial literacy among school students and various segments of society. The CBJ has been a major partner and funder for INJAZ's programs, and INJAZ has continuously worked towards scaling up financial education programs to gradually reach all students across the kingdom. Through advocating the significance of the financial literacy, reaching out to establishing dialogue with stakeholders, and building bridges between public and private sectors. Over the last 20 years of hands-on experience in developing and implementing financial literacy programs in over 220 public schools in all governorates, INJAZ was the natural partner to the CBJ, to the Central Bank of Jordan, in its attempt to develop the financial literacy among children and youth in partnership with the Ministry of Education. Of course, this whole momentum that was created 5 years ago to launch the financial education program was complemented and supported by the Prime Ministry and the request to formation of the National Steering Committee of the Financial Education and the National Technical Committee of the Financial Education. And both of these FEP governing committees were instantly formed, and work on the project development immediately followed. The first principle, I would go back to the first principle, which is falling in love with the problem, because now it makes more sense to link it to this principle. What makes this whole picture complete is the drive and the passion of the champions. When we talk about champions, we talk about decision makers who fell in love with the program and advocated for it with all the stakeholders. Those decision makers from INJAZ, from the Central Bank of Jordan, from the Ministry of Education and other leading organizations such as Schuman Foundation and the Association of Banks in Jordan, all worked tirelessly to ensure smooth implementation of the FEP in schools all over Jordan. And finally, personal experiences that makes this whole experience relevant to our lives, starting from the people who work on the project. For example, Dr. Murad Awad, who is the manager of the lab, who is a passionate mathematician, who led the work on developing the FEP curricula for all grades, among other roles. The curriculum development specialists at INJAZ, who made sure that the FEP is written using our gender lens that we usually use, and learned along the way the importance of reflecting gender equality, as well as inclusivity and do no harm approach onto other INJAZ's programs. My fellow researcher, Ms. Farah Abu Saif, whose passion for documenting this whole process of FEP will nurture more awareness on the importance of this topic for the future of workforce. The enthusiastic teachers, of course, who assumed this role and learned from the FEP as much as they taught it to their students. These whole stories are only the tip of the iceberg of how FEP is changing the attitudes and financial behaviors and raising awareness to a generation that might not inherit their financial burdens and debts and crises to their children, which has been my story for the last 15 years with my folks, because now they are aware and have the knowledge, skills, and behavioral attitudes related to financial literacy that my parents, unfortunately, did not fully acquire. This could not have happened, of course, if INJAZ and the Central Bank of Jordan and the Ministry of Education did not demonstrate a passionate and real public-private partnership that engages the civil society and works in harmony to achieve clear and specific goals. About the third principle, which is scaling to a cyclical approach, back to the focus areas that I mentioned when I started talking, and the main activities of the lab that we are currently working on, and since the breakout of COVID-19, INJAZ swiftly started coordinating with the Ministry of Education to jumpstart the FEP digitization. The first phase that we are currently working on since March include transforming the FEP curricula into video classes according to the lesson plan for all the grades. However, INJAZ is also working on enhancing this experience and looking for ways for involving the teachers in the process through a research activities that we are planning on kicking off during this month. Another activity that was based on the findings from the field research back in late 2019, where the research team worked on interviews and focus groups with the Ministry of Education supervisors, the teachers, and the students from different areas, especially in the South, and validated the need for more efforts to reach out to those target groups, especially in the South governorates, with relatively limited number of teachers spread in very remote areas. In addition to this challenge, the other challenge of delivering direct quality training to the teachers. Hence, the research team will be working with another relevant departments in INJAZ and in the Ministry of Education, of course, to deliver online direct training of teachers in the fall of 2020, reaching out directly to more teachers, especially in remote areas in the southern governorates, instead of the regular cascade training model which INJAZ does with the Ministry of Education supervisors, who usually cascade the training that they learn to the teachers in the governorates. This, of course, goes hand in hand with INJAZ's plan to initiate the teacher support hubs, which will offer services such as year-long mentoring instead of just a single training at the beginning of each year, and coaching to teachers through peer-to-peer approach, in addition to volunteering experts to coach the teachers on the content of the FEP. This cyclical approach of the lab allows us always to reflect and learn from the process as it unfolds. And it encourages a stronger link between practice and research, which will eventually enhance the scaling of the FEP. Thank you. This is my part of the presentation.
Thanks a lot, Patrick and Ghaith. It would be great if you switch off your microphone. Yes, otherwise we have always the echo. Thanks a lot for your presentation and keeping the time. But I also got reminded that we were a bit late. It was like due to the technical issues, and also like David let me know the questions are still overseeable. So my suggestion would be like really use the chat, come up with like also it can be comments. It doesn't have to be necessary questions, but we will sum up that one after the next presentation. And I'm really glad to see now in the picture I see like Alia Zureikat, and but also I think next behind you with a bit of a distance, the Corona COVID-19 distance, I see a Radia Al-Haris. So it's really great to see you. I had the opportunity to see you last week in person, with also a bit of a distance, but it's always nice to also welcome you today to our first webinar series. So both of the colleagues work for the Higher Council of the Rights of Persons with Disability. Radia Al-Haris is the Secretary General Assistant for Technical Affairs and Media Spokesperson at the Higher Council. She previously served as the Director of Policy and Planning, Director of Educational Programs and Accreditation Standards. So you're very familiar also with the topic of education, I know that. And also prior to joining ACD, you worked as the Disabled Children Association in Saudi Arabia and as a Senior Speech and Language Pathologist and as a teacher of English language for the Jordan Ministry of Education. Alia Zureikat, you are currently an advisor to the President of the Higher Council since March 2015. You having hold this position, and you are the director also of the International Relation and Cooperation Department at the Higher Council to ensure that disability and human rights are upheld and sustained within a variety of national policies and strategies. You hold a master degree in politics and international relations and a bachelor degree in European studies, both from the Royal Holloway University of London. Yes, so I leave it to that because we also send around your bios beforehand. So I'm really excited to listen what you can tell us about like the e-learning programs during COVID-19 pandemic in Jordan. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stephanie. It's always a pleasure to join GIZ and the MOE on these ventures. And we were glad equally to see you last week. Seeing you in person is different always. For the purpose of this presentation today, we thought that I will do the presentation and then my colleague Alia here will be taking up the Q&As. To all of you whom I cannot see, I say good afternoon and thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I will just momentarily share my presentation so you can see it. Are you able to see the presentation now?
Yes, we are. Maybe you can have it in presenter mode, if possible.
Yes, exactly. Is that better? Can you see that?
That's perfect. That's perfect,
Great.
Alia. Thanks.
Great. So without further ado, let's start. So we'll be talking about the e-learning programs that the Higher Council came up with during the last 3 months during COVID in Jordan. Just a bit of background to start off with. HCD, the Higher Council, is the primary national technical resource on all disability rights and issues. We are the government's policy advocacy organization.
We also function as a national disability watchdog, and we are the entity that's responsible for raising the capacity of the different service providers, whether in the private sector or the public sector. Since 2017, our blueprint has been the Law on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, number 20, for the year 2017. This law has been revolutionary, to say the least, because it is the first ever anti-discrimination piece of legislation, not only in Jordan, but across the Arab world as well. And it presents, amongst other features, a set of time-bound roles and responsibilities for line ministries, including the Ministry of Education. It also, on this point, on the point of anti-discrimination and non-discrimination, it also presents the first ever definition on violence as the denial of a right or freedom. So any person denied of the right to education per this law is regarded as an act of violence or abuse. Now, as we all know, and this is not new to Jordan, COVID has presented new challenges for all countries, and we are not in a vacuum, so we are part and parcel. The issue of e-learning for all was a grave challenge, primarily because when we looked online, we found that very little resources on e-learning strategies were available. The Ministry of Education has developed a quick and efficient response plan, and HCV in and of itself took it upon itself with the ministry to put up a number of response and protection measures that include awareness raising, monitoring cases of violence, and a set of guiding principles on how to deal with people with disabilities, various disabilities, as well as, for example, issuing permits and other specific needs. Now, specifically for the topic of our presentation, we issued a number of interventions that are targeted because we were thinking what works best for each and every impairment group. So persons who are deaf, persons who have visual disabilities or who are blind, and persons with intellectual disabilities who are our primary target or our primary concern. So, at the very start of the COVID-19 pandemic in Jordan, we issued a number of standards and regulations for distance learning assessment and examinations for students with visual disabilities, hearing disabilities, and learning difficulties. We also issued a number of reasonable accommodations remotely for students with disabilities in higher education institutions. What this means is that, for example, for students who don't have internet bundles in the remote areas, HCD took it upon themselves to provide such internet bundles. Those who needed sign language interpreters present within their premises were also provided with that, just as two simple examples. The e-learning interventions, we created curricula in sign language for grades 1 through 12 for students who are deaf. So if you look, when you get the presentations after the webinar, you'll see that wherever there's a blue font with underlining, it's actually a link to the actual platform that we are referring to. For those with intellectual disabilities and their families, we developed with the Habaibna platform, which is a platform developed by two parents of children with autism. We developed a platform for counseling and psychosocial services. If you look on the screen in front of you, you'll see that the platform has a number of experts, each with a specialization. Because the captions on the screen are in Arabic, I'm going to go ahead and just mention a few examples for you in English. So, for example, you have experts with physiotherapy, occupational therapy, mental health issues, special education, and just basically an A to Z lineup of people who can help parents with intellectual disabilities, especially because we know that when for children with intellectual disabilities, when the system and the routine that they're used to is kind of disrupted, things get a little bit more difficult. So the need for such platforms was great, and thanks to the Habaibna net platform, they were able to join forces with us, and we were able to produce what you see in front of you here. On the same level, for persons with intellectual disabilities, autism, and other disabilities, we developed a YouTube page for resources on intellectual disabilities. So basically, like e-learning strategies, we also found that there are very few resources that can be used at this time online, and we took it upon ourselves to develop around 200 awareness videos for people whether interested in the topic or whether they are families and friends of people with intellectual disabilities that they can use. So we spoke about sign language, we spoke about intellectual disabilities, but now the focus will shift as well to people who are blind or with low vision. So again, all learning interventions must be made accessible for people who are blind. And on the screen in front of you, we have a picture of a platform that we developed with the Al-Basira initiative. Al-Basira means the vision, a private sector initiative that took it upon itself to create accessible videos for students from grades 1 to 10. And of course, because we have at this time of year, usually April and May and June are the time of year when Jordanians in the Jordanian public sector and the private sector sit for examinations, the end of year examinations known as the Tawjihi. We took it upon ourselves to post the material for the full term on our website. Now, just in terms of numbers, to give you a sense of the magnitude of the work that was been done for the past 3 months, we have developed around 578 videos for students who are blind, 906 videos in sign language for deaf students, and approximately the 200 videos for persons with intellectual disabilities. And one such example of those videos is the awareness video that we did on COVID prevention. So what you have there on the screen is a clip of an animation of a child on a wheelchair saying that, you know, sanitization is needed and at all times. And on the left-hand side corner of the same screen, you'll see a sign language interpreter portraying the same message in sign language. Now, nothing new is with that, it changes, so we're aware of that. This is the first time we've ventured into doing something of this scope and as quickly as possible, so there are challenges, and there still are challenges to implementation. The number one challenge was the issue of resources, our capacity to answer to the gaps and needs in a timely manner. There were requests that came in through hotlines. We had 6 hotlines that were functional 24/7, and the ability to answer to each and every need in accordance to the issue presented. There were technical glitches, as we saw earlier today. The delay in starting this webinar was because of technical the progress, as it were, and of course the restrictions and movement in lockdown. Jordan was in lockdown for 12 weeks approximately. We just came out of this lockdown, and in fact I myself had just returned back to the office yesterday, so it's a relief, but it was an interesting and strange experience to have. And with the restrictions and lockdown, the ability to communicate with persons with disabilities and dealing with the requests in a timely manner was also a challenge. Last but not least, what I would say here is that what we've done is just a baseline. It's a foundation for future work. And now we are looking to basically see how we can institutionalize all the different interventions we have done. I will stop there, and if there is any area or issue or question in relation to what we have presented, Nadir will zero in on it during the Q&A section. Thank you for listening. And before we go, here's just a quick rundown to all our social media platforms in case you're wanting to kind of delve in afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Alia.
Thank you, Alia.
Also, you can switch off your microphone again to avoid my echo. Yes, thanks a lot. I mean, like I know because we had been in contact for in the months and weeks of the lockdown, and I know how busy you have been. And I mean, again, it's like in your presentation, it was reflected again nicely, like also what you have been achieved, but also like, of course, everybody knows what still has to be done. So I would like to hand over to David, because I know there have been some questions in the chat, and thanks a lot for everybody who's still staying with us, even we're a bit over time. I mean, over the official presentation time, which is exactly the 10 minutes we have been late in the beginning. So I quickly hand over to David to tell us a bit what's going on in the chat.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you all for your questions. Yes, from the chat, I can see we have 4 questions, and maybe I can summarize all of them, and then we could go one by one. The first question is from Ms. Aisha Abdulatif. She would like to know what the Ministry of Education has achieved in providing inclusive education for children with intellectual disability and autism. The second question is from the Center of Hope, and the question is inclusive vocational training included in the inclusive education strategy? The third question is from UCL Center for Inclusive Education. What are the provisions for teacher ongoing training and school level culture change to support inclusive teaching and ethos? And the fourth question is from Ines Alves, and she would like to have a clarification on how the strategy will translate into targets related to the education strategic plan for 2018-2022. Those are the questions that we have received in our chat. Please feel free to also ask questions in Arabic. Our colleague Serene will support in the translation to English. Thank you.
So thank you, David, for wrapping up. So as far as I understood, like some of the questions are dedicated for our colleagues in the Ministry of Education, isn't it? So we hand over to them.
Yes, maybe, yes, Dr. Alia.
هلا بالنسبة للسؤال المتعلق في إجراءات الوزارة والخدمات اللي قدمتها بخصوص ما يتعلق في الطلاب والأطفال من ذوي الإعاقة الذهنية أو التوحد. هلا إحنا بنعرف إنه في بعض الخدمات اللي يعني اشتغلت عليها الوزارة في الفترة السابقة، لكن هذه الخدمات ما وصلت لمرحلة إنها تغطي كافة احتياجات الأطفال من ذوي الإعاقة الذهنية أو الأطفال المصابين باضطراب التوحد. الآن إحنا خلال الخطة العشرية القادمة هذه بإذن الله حتزيد الوزارة من جودة الخدمات المقدمة للأطفال من ذوي الإعاقة الذهنية. في السابق إحنا زي ما بنعرف إنه في عدد من الغرف الملحقة بالمدارس اللي بتخدم عندنا الأطفال من ذوي الإعاقة الذهنية، تقريبا ما يقارب عددها 27 غرفة. كل غرفة طبعا فيها معلمتين بتخصص تربية خاصة، زائد إنه بتوفر لهم الوزارة كمان باص لنقل الطلاب الملتحقين في هذه الغرفة. البرامج الموجودة فيها دائما إحنا بحاجة إنه لتطويرها ولإضافة الأشياءات اللي بتساعد الأطفال من ذوي الإعاقة الذهنية على تطوير مهاراتهم. بصراحة الخدمات اللي المتوفرة الآن ما بتصل للطموح اللي إحنا فعليا عم نطلع له خلال الفترة القادمة، بحيث إنه إحنا بنعرف إنه في هناك تطور ملحوظ في كافة الدول العالم حول الخدمات المقدمة للأطفال من ذوي الإعاقة الذهنية وبالذات للتوحد. بالنسبة الآن لبرنامج التوحد، الوزارة يعني أعطت الموافقة على فتح خدمات مخصصة للأطفال من ذوي الإعاقة بالذات المتعلقة في اضطراب التوحد. الآن هذه الخدمات بتحتاج إلى مؤسسة من حيث إيش؟ من حيث إيجاد الكوادر المتدربة على الخدمات المتعلقة في اضطراب التوحد، متعلقة على تدريب الأطفال من ذوي المصابين بالتوحد، لأنه بنعرف إنه إحنا اضطراب التوحد هو كثير اضطراب متخصص له مهارات متخصصة من المقدمين للخدمات لازم إنها تتوفر فيهم. لازم تتوفر عندهم مهارات تدريبية معينة، شهادات معينة. الآن عندنا موجود البيسك، لكن الآن إحنا بحاجة إلى تطوير مهارات المعلمين فيما يتعلق بالخدمات المتخصصة في مجال التوحد. فالمؤسسة لهذا الموضوع انوجدت في الوزارة، لكن الآن إحنا بحال يعني بصدد إنه في المرحلة القادمة راح تكون الخدمات متواجدة بشكل متخصص أكثر في هذا المجال. ممكن إنه الأهالي يستفسروا إنه الآن إحنا أبنائنا لغاية ما نصل لهذه المرحلة عندكم كوزارة التربية والتعليم إنه للخدمات المتخصصة إلى آخره. وزارة التربية والتعليم ما ألغت أي علاقة مع أي مركز من التربية الخاصة، بالعكس إنه إحنا خلال القانون الجديد في هناك نقل مجموعة من المراكز التربية الخاصة اللي كانت مرتبطة بالتنمية الاجتماعية وبتقدم خدمات متعلقة في التعليم، الآن حتنتقل لوزارة التربية والتعليم ضمن خطة مدروسة بين الطرفين، وتقديم ما يعني الخدمات المتعلقة فيها المراكز تتبع لوزارة التربية والتعليم. هذا الحكي بيضمننا إنه إحنا بإمكاننا بالتعاون مع هذه المراكز إنه إمكانياتنا إنه تقديم الخدمات ومتابعة تقديم الخدمات متخصصة للأطفال مصابي التوحد أو الإعاقة الذهنية، لكن بطريقة مدروسة وإيجابية بحيث أن يكون أثرها إيجابي أكثر ما يكون إلى آثار سلبية.
Thank you, Dr. Alia. I'm not sure, like, Sabine, are you giving a brief translation? Great, thank you.
Yes. Hello all, I'm back again. So, like, I'm just gonna go through like the points because, like, Dr. Alia elaborated in the topic. I think because like she's passionate about it. So the services regarding like a student with disability, especially intellectual and autism, in the past period, like there was like initiatives like basically to provide this sort of support to the family and the students. But like the plan was like from the point of view of the Ministry of Education to have like a structure, to establish a structure in the ministry jointly with the Ministry of Social Development. They have a special providing specific services for autism, like students who's student with disability related to intellectual and autism, in coordination with the Ministry of Social Development. They currently have like 27 resource room. The plan like to have like 2 teachers specialized with a previous experience, like background in special education, and the student with the autism and intellectual disability will be part and served in these rooms basically. The initiative is, they know like the fact that it doesn't cover the all target group. Basically, it's just a startup. Hopefully, in the future, that's would be more structured and also like more covered, like more spread and upscaled in all Jordan. It doesn't fulfill the ambitions that, or the plan, or the vision that the Ministry of Education have, and they know that, and they trying with in the action plan that they will cover in the inclusive education to address this topic, and basically that's it. Like, I think hopefully I covered most of the thing, and I'm sorry if I missed some of the points, and yes. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Serene, for translating. I know that's always a bit challenging. And thank you also for Dr. Alia to jumping in and help us to answer the questions. Just like to make sure that we also, Gasper, I mean, like David, maybe you can also make that one sure. And I would start like going to the question of Ines. Ines, it's great to have you in our webinar. And your question was related like to the strategy and how it translates into targets, and of course how it's like matched with like the core document, the ESP Education Strategic Plan 2018-2022. I try to answer that one because like we are currently supporting our partners, the Ministry of Education, but also the Higher Council, in exactly translating the strategy to targets. So what we started before also COVID-19 hit us was like formulating an action plan for the next 3 years. So to break down the different like components which you have been introduced earlier in the webinar of the inclusive education strategy, down to concrete activities for the next 3 years. So this is like the document is currently under progress, but we almost finalized it. Also, like thanks to the Ministry of Education, who formed a committee, and also like the Higher Council are involved, like to give internal feedback. So the next step is like to finalize the action plan before, of course, we wish to share it with a broader community of different donors and implementing agency involved already in inclusive education or will be involved in future, so that we can even use this action plan as a steering tool for the activities. The next task, which of course has been done, and this is like to relate it to the existing education strategic plan. So on the one hand, in the action plan, you always find like where the different activities align to. And on the other hand, UNESCO, the partner at the Ministry of Education for the ESP, is also supporting to align the two strategies. So I know that this one is currently undergoing. And of course, and this is something which we faced in regard to the education strategic plan, but also like our the 10 years inclusive education strategy, that by like facing now the COVID-19 crisis and also like the Ministry of Education emergency and response plan to that one, of course, we also find that we want to make sure that activities which haven't maybe been thought of or not prioritized before reflected in the plans. So I hope, Ines, that answered that question, but I'm also happy to chat during our next call about more in detail about the next step, because I know that the European Union is also supporting the implementation of the strategy, which is like really well appreciated, because it needs a lot of support. So David, maybe you can just like quickly help me if we missed anything. Like I know there was like a question regarding ongoing teacher training, and I maybe would be interested, Patrick and Ghaith, if you could also give us a bit of an insight, like from your own program, because like Patrick, you have mentioned it in the beginning. also you have been challenged by COVID-19 and looking in the different partner countries, like how to cope about this. And you have mentioned how important teacher training is in regard to that one. So maybe you can give us a bit of an insight, like what are you currently doing or what you plan to do in this?
So let me start by. Sorry, I just want to add a simple comment to what Catherine just said about the upcoming training in the fall. As I said, it's usually the traditional training method that is carried out in INJAZ, but this time it will be a little bit different. It will be online. So the reach out to the teachers will be much more direct in terms of quality and also in terms of numbers as well. The other thing that we are thinking seriously of adding to the content of the training is training on technical or let's say online facilitation and teaching aids and tools. So that the teachers will be at least equipped with online methodologies and skills to be able to communicate with their students. If the upcoming school year will be a little bit different, I think it will be. It will be some sort of a blended learning approach rather than students attending the schools. It will be a mix between attending some classes and online teaching and learning processes. So we will be equipping the teachers as well with how to use conferencing, let's say, apps, communication apps, facilitation apps, etc.
Thanks, Ghaith. I would just add, in Jordan and as well as our other labs that I introduced a bit ago, all countries, I think, have an interest in online learning approaches and virtual training for teachers, and also, delivering classroom instruction virtually. So I think coronavirus has actually presented a window of opportunity to try or test some of these approaches that countries might have already been planning to try at some point in the future. So Brookings emphasizes the importance of documenting the process of moving to online learning, whether for teachers or for children, so that lessons can be captured and shared with others, with other countries, that is, or other education systems. So that's something that really is keeping us focused right now, and which Ghaith, as he mentioned, is leading in Jordan. And we look forward to sharing some of our findings in an ongoing way once we have, some things that we're learning and can capture and share. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks also from my side. And yes, it's indeed a very important topic. And this is like why we also focus our next webinar on the topic of ensuring psychosocial well-being in teaching and learning. And that's also like to look a bit on the teacher's perspective. So I hope that the colleague who asked the question will also join the next webinar. And I know that there has been a question on regard to vocational training education and how it is reflected in the 10 years inclusive education strategy. So Ghadir, would you maybe take that one up?
Turn on the video cam because it will lower the quality of the mainstreaming. So what we're trying to do here is that vocational training is part of the educational system. So what we are targeting when we are talking about inclusive education strategy, we'll be targeting everything related to the education, whether it was vocational training or the regular education as well. So for sure, this will be taken into consideration, and also we will be focusing on pre-vocational skills to develop it for students with intellectual disability when we feel like some of them cannot go ahead with the educational plan as supposed to be. So they will be offering some pre-vocational training as well. At the same level, we'll be also arranging with the vocational training centers at the Ministry of Labor because this is where the other students with disabilities might choose to go ahead with their life if they wish to go there and try to learn what is it life skill and go to the employment sector directly. Then it will be ready to accept them, and with the accessibility is there, the staff there is also trained in how to use strategies that also support and provide the necessary educational capacity for the persons with disabilities.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Radia, for taking it up. And as you have mentioned, I mean, it's a very important topic. And I mean, like, even if the strategy, I mean, it's really starting with the early ages, but of course, like in the end, we have to see the whole thing through. And that's also involving vocational training. Thanks a lot for that one. I'm not too sure, because I saw also in the chat now, which I was finally, it took me like 20 minutes to find it. I saw also some questions there, but we're reaching almost our end. I would suggest, like, also there was like a question I see by Aisha, also like a more like on how to deal with if a child gets refused by a government school. That's a really specific but really valuable question. So we would forward that one to our colleagues, to the MOE, and Aisha and also the others who have maybe questioned something, please use our email address, and we will secure that you will receive an answer. And David, maybe you can post your email again so that everybody knows how to contact you, so that we can make sure that your questions are followed up after the webinar. So I think it's like now closing time, and I know that people are really busy, and this is like why I want to make sure that we sum up on time. And first of all, I like to thank all the participants bearing with us, especially like I know there had been a bit of a technical hiccups in the beginning, but I hope not too much during the session. But we will work on that one too. But I mean, this is like something which is happening, and we all faced it in the previous weeks. I mean, like, I took away a lot of things. And I mean, like, on the one hand, it's really like, again, also seeing that COVID-19 had a lot of effects, especially on the topic of online distance learning. And I mean, we saw that there have been I mean, we saw the weaknesses in general of our education system. I mean, usually this is like happening when you have an emergency situation. You see where are weak spots, and of course one of the weak spots, and that's not only meant for Jordan, but this is globally the case, and I saw it in my own home country in Germany, how schools and the whole education system struggle to provide students with learning during that time, because online learning, distance learning haven't been set up, and that was like a lot of countries faced these problems. You also could see like that there are a lot of challenges, because I'm very sure, I mean, we all hope and pray that at one stage the pandemic will be over, or at least under control, so that really all students can go back to school again. But of course we also saw the opportunities, and I think that was also mentioned by the presenters, and we saw what happened in the last weeks, that we had a digital kind of jump already happening. And I mean, like, I see it with the Millions Learning Project. I mean, Patrick, Ghaith, you have mentioning that one. This is something you jumped on, and we saw like that tremendous developments took place. And I saw also like the great work being here by the Ministry of Education, but also the Higher Council. Again, we have to make sure, and that was also mentioning today, that there's not it's not only of providing then online learning and teaching, but of course we have to be secure, especially like in middle income and low income countries like Jordan, that not everybody will have like the hardware or the access to really then join the programs, and that especially also children with certain disabilities, even if they might have hardware, they need different forms of learning. And this is something also like we have then to take in mind by teaching. I like to come back what was said by Patrick, and it was great again. I was hearing that one a couple of years ago, this fall in love with a problem. And thank you, Patrick, for reminding me and us on that one again. And I think like that's a good closing for today, falling in love with the problem. And then we find a lot of solutions by focusing also, yes, what is still challenging. I like to invite everybody again to our second webinar, which is like on the June 15th. And we have the topic of ensuring psychosocial well-being in teaching and learning. And we have like a presenter from the Interagency Network for Education and Emergency. And we have a presenter from the Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Network. We will have again the Higher Council and the Ministry of Education to embed the webinar in our 10 years inclusive education strategy. And we will have some what we call voices from the ground to also see what happened in regard to psychosocial well-being in teaching and learning in Jordan in the last weeks. So before now really final closing, I would like to encourage you to it's a 2 minutes questionnaire, online questionnaire. And David, I think you posted in the chat now the link to it. So it would be really great if you can just like take the 2 minutes, because that one helping us for the next webinar to see your comments and feedback to also continuously learn and improve our own action. So I like to thank everybody, and it was great to have you. And also again, a huge thank you for our presenters, especially for Patrick getting up really early. I'm not too sure if you're going back to bed now or just like take an early leave probably this afternoon. So yes, again, thanks a lot, and see you hopefully next week. Bye.